Well, hello, Jim. How are you?
I'm doing great. Doing
Listen,
great.
normally what I'll do is, like a new guest, I'll ask you to introduce yourself,
Sure.
give us your background, and tell us how you ended up where you are at this point in your life.
Okay. Well, I was a county extension educator for Ohio State University for 24 years. Started to work on a PhD in environmental sciences. I have a bachelor's degree in animal science, and then two masters, one in business and one in agriculture economics. And then I worked on a PhD, but didn't quite finish it. Kind of life got in the way. I started kind of late. I was 45 when I started, and I really wanted to watch my son, run cross country and do track, and then took a new job working for NRCS, USDA, NRCS. I did that for 3 years as a soil health specialist, and was glad to get out of the government, to be honest with you. And so then I started my own business in 2019. I was kind of recognized by the National No-Till Conference as one of the top educators, and things were going great. And then 2020 came along, and everybody knows what happened in 2020. So then business kind of slumped off a little bit. But I do a number of things. I consult, I do teaching, I consult on soil tests, sell cover crop seed, and one of the big things I do is sell I&J crimper rollers. So I have enough to keep me busy.
Sure sounds that way. So ironically, I've been in contact with the NRCA about a project.
Mm-hmm.
But unfortunately, we aren't considered big guys. So they bounced us to extension, and so we've been negotiating with extension. And then I think that once we settle there and get the data, then we'll be able to go back to NRCA. But yeah, that's a difficult world to navigate for sure.
Yeah. Yep. So what do we want to talk about today?
So, well, we've got a wealth of information in front of us. So let's dive in with perhaps some of your testing. What type of testing do you get your clients involved with to really give them a robust suggestion? Hey, quiet.
So I usually look at 3 or 4 different tests that I really rely on. Number one, you got to have a good soil test, and you want that to include your organic matter, of course, and all your micronutrients. I spend a lot of time on micronutrients, and the reason micronutrients are so important is they're usually activating enzymes in your plant. So that's the first step. Second, usually I do a combination of tissue tests. If they can do some sap analysis, that's great. I also like to scout. And with those 3 things, you can usually do a pretty good job. But then it's always great if you can get a biological test, something like the Haney test, just to make sure, all those things together really help out. SAP test will tell you a lot. If you have high SAP tests, you know that Brix, I should say, the Brix, when the Brix levels are high, you're going to have a plant that is functioning well, and it's going to keep the insects away. Most diseases that we get are related to a nutrient deficiency. I see it all the time. There's several really good books on that I consult all the time. Huber has one about the all the diseases that are associated with nutrient deficiencies. So that's probably where I come from as my background. So
do you know the name of the title of the book? Because we
I have it in my office. If you gave me about 10 seconds, I could probably
go get it.
Right, because just give me a second here.
Resources. Ken, you have any announcements you want to make?
Just that my arm's feeling a little bit better, so we should be doing the Wednesday and Friday show. I'm supposed to be at Camp Canna giving a talk on Sunday as well.
Nice. And you and Lil are doing well?
As well as can be expected with me not being able to do a dang thing. I could barely type or anything. It's crazy.
So have you been doing physical therapy?
A couple of massage therapy, and I've got an appointment on the 3rd to go in for a chiropractor, functional chiropractor. So hopefully, if it's something that's pinched in there with the nerve, he'll be able to work it out.
Nice. Have you tried one of those like squeezy balls?
Yeah, and I've got Chinese medicine balls that you roll in your hands.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've found those helpful over the years when I've had a problem or not busted, but severely injured my hand. That just for whatever reason, that just soft, relaxing, the rolling the balls around in your hand really helps a lot.
Oh, exactly. Well, just to keep the muscles moving, like the one massage therapist, it's the outer band of nerves on my arm. That's the real problem.
The fascia tissue or whatever it's called, the fascia.
Yeah, something like that. But it started in the back of my neck and worked down into the shoulder and arm. But there's Jim back with a whole stack of books.
Right. Oh, hey, we're going to talk about books. You might as well grab all the goodies, right? Of course, the one I was looking for, I couldn't find. And it just, here's the one I like, though. I don't know if you can see that. Mineral Nutrition and Plant Disease.
Yep.
This is by Lawrence. I'm probably going to butcher their names. Datnoff, Wade Elmer, and Don Huber. This one is really, really good for looking at all the diseases and all the nutrient deficiencies, just about any plant. They have lists of all the different types of disease. Not only, what's really interesting is I'm really getting into the form of nitrogen now. And nitrates are different than the ammonium. Sometimes nitrates will cause a disease. Too much nitrate, sometimes too much ammonium, sometimes just too much nitrogen. But really the form of nitrogen is very important. And we're finding out some of the information coming from John Kemp. I don't know if you've ever had John Kemp on, but
I think he's a little too famous for me.
Too famous, okay. Well, John's information is that if you're trying to promote growth, nitrates, potassium, and chloride promote the auxins, which are the hormones that cause plants to grow. Okay. If you want to promote yield, then you got to look at the ammonium form of nitrogen, phosphorus, and manganese. Okay. So those are kind of the three. And then there's one element that kind of is the teeter-totter, because usually what happens is you want to start off early in the growing season with more auxins. So you kind of push the nitrates, the potassium, the chloride, to get that plant growing. You're always going to have some growth even later in the season, but as you get later and later in the season, you're going to have more and more of the auxins. So then you're going to need the ammonium form, the phosphorus, and the manganese. And it's interesting when we look at plants' uptake of these nutrients, a majority of these nutrients are taken up. A lot of nutrients are taken up, let's say if we use corn at tasseling time, but there are two nutrients that can be taken up later that almost 50% are taken up later, and that's your phosphorus and your manganese. So that's why that's really important. And then, of course, there's one element we didn't talk about, and that's the one that is kind of the teeter-totter. This is for the gibberellin that kind of balances everything, and that's calcium. Calcium gives you both yield and growth. I should say growth and yield, but does both. So you got to have those elements. And one of the things I really look at on calcium, since we're getting into this discussion, calcium is such a major, it's one of the big three. I don't know why we have N, P, and K. It's usually nitrogen, potassium. Calcium is the third element that we need the most of. Calcium, I can't remember the exact number. It's something like 130 to 140 some enzymes that it controls in the plant. So you've got to have good calcium. And an element that most people maybe don't pay enough attention to is boron. If you don't have boron in the plant, or in the soil and taken up, boron is the bus driver that gets calcium into the plant. So I spend a lot of time looking at boron levels, and most of our soil tests are way, way low. You may come back and you may have half a percent of boron out there. That's not enough, because when I go out and scout, I'll see boron and calcium deficiency. So you need to have a minimum like 1-2% for most of our major crops. So just a little bit on the nutrient side and how important that is for making things work. So
yeah, let's expand on this, because this is really, really valuable information. So let's start back with N.
Okay.
There are various forms of N, as you discussed.
Right.
Actually, some new, pretty fantastic amino acid nitrogen forms.
Yes. Yes.
That will be shaping the future of this. But as that comes more to popular understanding, let's just stick with ammonia and nitrate. And I think that this is one of those things that a lot of people don't understand, is that for nitrate to actually be taken up by the plant, the plant has to perform 4 different processes, which requires a lot of ATP. So you're losing plant energy in metabolizing nitrate. And another big piece of nitrate is that you need high carbon in your soil, because if you don't have carbon, the microbes can't metabolize it. So you're draining the plant, you're draining the carbon pool in your soil. And in a lot of cases with people that till, now they've oxidized what nitrogen or what carbon is left in the soil system on top of it. Yeah. So I had, a lot of the earlier foundational work was all driven back toward carbon, because we should really be talking about NPCP, right?
Well, carbon is the top element as far as the one that's most lacking in our soil, because we can't get enough carbon in order to, we run out of photosynthesis within about an hour to an hour and a half, because we don't have enough carbon dioxide in the soil. Okay, so I have a whole slide on that. If you look at what carbon dioxide levels are in the atmosphere, it's like 400 parts per million, roughly 410. But where does the plant get the carbon? And most farmers, even scientists, will tell you it comes from the atmosphere, which isn't totally incorrect. But the source of carbon that we're using for the plants is coming from the soil. The soil has 3,000 to 10,000 times more carbon than what's in the atmosphere. Okay. And at night, what happens as it cools down, we have photosynthesis, or we have respiration going on. We can raise that level from 3,000 to 10,000 to 20,000 to 30,000 parts per million. Okay. Sounds like a lot. But within about an hour to an hour and a half after the sun comes up, all the carbon dioxide is being used up by the plant. And now photosynthesis is kind of stuck, because we just don't have enough carbon. We don't have enough carbon. That's why greenhouses, they're manipulating. They have a closed system. They will raise that carbon dioxide level up there tremendously, and that will greatly increase your production if you can do that. So the higher your organic matter, the more nutrients you're storing, the more nitrogen you have, NPK, all the micronutrients, the better your soil health is. Everything's just working really good. So yeah, it all comes back to that. I agree with you 100%.
Yeah, and I guess this goes back to why nature was so successful before we introduced our modern agricultural practices, because the soil itself had the microbes, had the aggregates, created the CO2, released it right in the plant itself, and provided the whole cycle, both the N cycle and the C cycle, in situ, right in place, right around the plant.
It's about the biology. I see your little note there, but the big killer in agriculture, I hate to tell everybody this, is the more you till it, the more you ruin it.
The more you till it.
The more you till it, the more you burn it up, the harder the soil gets. And sorry about that.
No, it's good to see you get excited.
Yeah, kind of.
Went a little sideways.
Yes. So yes, but that is the issue. Too much tillage. That's what every time we till the soil. I can go out in a field, and I've had guys do this. I'll go out in the field. I'll say, "Are you guys a no-tiller?" And they'll say, "Yeah." And then I kind of dig a little deeper. I said, "Have you ever done any tillage like in the last 10 or 15 years?" Well, let me see. One year, I used a vertical till tool, so I went down 3 inches with that. And 1 year, I went down 6 inches to subsoil, to do some subsoil. So we go out and it was a real dry year, and they were videotaping me, and I took a chunk of soil, and it was so dry, it split right at the 3 inch, like a pancake, came apart right at 3 inches and right at 6 inches, right where they did the tillage. Matter of fact, I can go in any field and still find the plow pan, or I can tell what depth they're tilling it just by taking a soil probe, and you're going to find those layers, because all you're doing is with that tillage tool, and even a planter will compact our soil. Sidewall compaction, and the bottom of that disc does the disc blades on a planter will compact your soil. But you can go out and you can test anywhere, and it's not just where the wheel tracks are. You're going to find the layers of compaction, and that's all tillage. It's almost uniform across those fields. So compaction is all part of what you're talking about. Not having enough carbon, not having all the sugars and glues, and not having the right biology in our soil to make this system really work. If we could go back and start from scratch and take virgin soils, we can make no-till and cover crops work fantastically. But our problem is we've had 75 to 100 years of tillage going on. It takes a lot of work to get that soil back in shape. And that's why agriculture struggles on making the no-till and the cover crops work. That's the biggest problem, I think.
Yeah, that's beautifully said. Now, backing it up, do you use a penetrometer, or do you actually take core samples?
Penetrometers are okay, but here's the problem with all penetrometers, and even the Haney test is very misleading. Don't get me wrong, soil compaction is very, very important, but in a very dry year, ideally that soil has to be 50% moisture when you take that sample. Now, how many times do you go out there and the soil is just perfect? It's 50%. I got a nasty fly here that's just bugging the crap out of me. I don't know if he's trying to say something different or what, but that's the problem with penetrometers. Is if you don't have 50% moisture, it's going to give you an erroneous assumption. It's going to say it's so far off the chart if it's dry out there. So ideally, how often do we walk a field and we have that ideal 50% moisture? The penetrometers aren't as good. Probably the best thing is your bulk density, but that can also be impacted somewhat by how dry the weather is. So those are all issues.
So interestingly enough, I was just at Rodale in California doing their field day.
Sure.
And we used a penetrometer, and you're going to love this.
Yeah.
We did side by side on.
Yep.
This was in a strawberry patch, so they have what's called plastic mulch.
Yep.
So they did. We did a penetrometer under plastic mulch and then under cover crop.
Mm-hmm.
And we got the penetrometer to sink all the way to the needle without hitting red.
Yeah.
And we couldn't get it in 6-8 inches on the mulch without it hitting.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
So and believe it or not, this soil was pretty dry, but the key was it was aggregated. Like I could take my hand and just stick it down into the soil.
Right.
That's a great indicator that even though it's dry, it's not compacted. Now the aggregates themselves, when you snap them open, you could see the moisture value inside of it.
Yes.
But outside, they look like dust balls. You know, like they're completely dry. You could just kind of peel it off.
But you could take those aggregates, and it's the micro aggregate. So when you take a big aggregate and you squish it between your fingers like this, then it turns into micro aggregates. The micro aggregates are the ones that set up like cement. The macro aggregates have the sugars and the glues in it, and those are the ones that are going to allow the air and the water to infiltrate your soil and give you a much lower bulk density, so you have less compaction.
Yep, agree.
So that's really important. And you bring up something else that's just so important. What maybe a lot of people really haven't thought about too much, and I'll tell you what, redox, and that whole thing. I can remember when I was in school, the chemistry just I was scared to death of redox and never really understood it very well. And then until about, I don't know, maybe with age, all of a sudden I had a real good explanation of it, and it just like it clicked. So here's the thing. What people don't realize is that we have to have anaerobic bacteria and anaerobic conditions to release a majority of the micronutrients in the soil. And this really drove me nuts because the first thing I thought of was, does that mean compacted soils are better? And I was in a funk for about 3 months till I got this thing figured out. I mean, it drove me nuts. And it's a little bit like Goldilocks, okay? We all know the three bears, okay? So the story of the three bears, not too hot, not too cold. So let's assume we have a really dry year and we have a drought. We have no water, okay? So now your soils are well aerated, but the nutrients aren't recycling, okay? Now let's assume we have just a really wet year, okay? And the soil is wet all the time. What happens? Well, the anaerobic conditions are there. We have a lack of oxygen. We get a lot of nutrients being released, but here's the problem. They all get flushed out of the soil. They either go down to the tile lines or they run off the surface. So what is the best condition? It's that Goldilocks, okay? Wet, dry, wet, dry, wet, dry. That $1 million rain that everybody loves, that ½ inch to an inch of rain. You want to have well aerated soil so your roots can grow. And then where those aggregates are, you want it to be just slightly wet, just enough that it has anaerobic bacteria around it or inside those micro aggregates. And what happens is that will release the nutrients, and the roots are close enough they can grab onto it before it leaches out of the soil. Now you've got a perfect system, and you're keeping those micronutrients recycling, and the plant grows like crazy. So that wet, dry, wet, dry, wet, dry, just a little bit of wet, and then it dries out, just a little bit of wet, and it dries out. That's where you get your best growth, okay? And even if you get a soaker, it soaks in the ground for, maybe a day, 24 hours. That's not all bad because you still got some oxygen in the soil. If you've got good soil, high organic matter, you've got enough oxygen there. The roots can live, but they can grab on to all those micronutrients. And micronutrients are what key most of our enzymes and really increase the growth and the yield in our plants. Okay, does that all kind of make sense?
Oh, dude, I talk about soil as a battery.
Yes. Yep.
Right. So that's redox. That understanding that negative and positive charges, and how do you manage those? So I totally understand what you said, and I dove down Olivia Hassan's paper that I think John Kemp posted on. He did a whole course on it.
Yes,
amazing. It was a super deep dive. I had a study group with the three of us. I don't know. We spent probably a few months on that dive, just that dive, to better understand it. And, you know, ironically, back probably 10 or 15 years ago, when I was really diving into this deep, and I was working under Elaine, and Elaine is no aerobes, no anaerobics, no good, no. And I kept telling her, I'm like, Elaine, like, I took what we call a rhizo sheath, which is that macro aggregate that you're talking about, and I cross-sectioned it, and I took soil samples from different pockets in that rhizo sheath, and I found a lot of anaerobic pockets. And I went back to her and tried to have a conversation about, well, Elaine, in nature, we have this condition, and I understand that you don't want to promote it because you're teaching people to potentially hurt the plants, not balance it, not find that sweet spot. So I
used to think of them as bad and good guys, but that's not the way to think about it. You need a balance. And you know what? If you got good soil structure, you'll always have that balance, okay? And you'll have somebody eating somebody else, and that's fine. That's all part of nature. But when you get totally anaerobic, that's when you get a lot of diseases. And then you've got a slew of nutrients being released, but a lot of them leach away. And then they get in our waters, and now we got harmful algae blooms in Lake Erie and all around the country. You can't go to any major city around them, whether they're on the coast or what, and we've got all these blooms going on out in the ocean or in the rivers, and that's too many nutrients at one time, just way too much. And we want to keep them in the soil. So you got to have that balance, and if you have the balance, then everything works great.
So Indica Dogo says Dr. Lane came around to facultatives. You know why she came around, dude? Because I was questioning her. I was questioning her for 18 months. I demonstrated to her. Because I came along with a product that was what's called fish manure. Right? And she's like, well, you can't go behind a fish with a pooper scooper. How do you collect it? And I basically explained to her. I said, look, I made this filter to pull the suspended solids out of the water column so I could put the water back in with my fish. And I collect that stuff and I put it on plants and it would explode. And I told her, I said, this material is loaded with facultative anaerobes. And then I demonstrated to her on a hay field that had been nuked with NPK. There was very little grass, a few tufts here and there, covered in weeds. And I said, look, I'm going to do this. I told the farmer I want him to, go in there in first of spring, as soon as he can get the tractor on the field without sinking it. I want him to I want him to completely reseed. And he did it. And then I went in with what I call partially stabilized. So this is at parts per million of oxygen around five parts. So it's small. Aerobic is considered 8 to 10. Anaerobic is 0. So I'm right in the middle, right? I did one application of that, and then I came back in the summer and I did what's called a food. So this was molasses, kelp, and humic acid. In the fall, I went back right after the first cutting, and I did a full aerobic, and that field became his best yielder ever. One season. So that was the reason why she started to at least talk about facultatives. Prior to that, she was anti everything except for aerobics. But,
and I can almost understand that, because when you've got a really good system, it's aerobic. I mean, when you've got a lot of organic matter, you have low bulk density, you have good airflow, but that doesn't mean there aren't zones in that soil. That's where those micro aggregates, if you go to the center of a micro aggregate, the oxygen level is down to almost 0. And that is a lack of oxygen, anaerobic conditions, and that's where these bacteria hang out. And that's something to, if you want to think about it, let's say we have a flood. How is it possible that after a major flood, we got all these aerobic bacteria? How in the heck do they survive? Well, it's because they get tied up into the macro aggregates, and there's zones in there that have oxygen, and they can live in there. And then those macro aggregates break open after a flood, after the soil starts to dry out, they break open, and pretty soon you repopulate the soil with both with the aerobic, but then you also have the anaerobic and your facultative bacteria, all those there. So there's always different species there. It can recover. Just kind of depends on how long it's flooded. The longer it's flooded, the longer it might take for it to recover. That is an issue though too. So.
Well, why do we generally in the past always do agriculture in floodplains?
Yes, right. All the new, well, part of it is all the new silt and all the organic matter that comes down. That is just, that's like burning a field. I mean, the prairies, when we burn them, my gosh, the amount of nutrients that are released that are tied up in that residue. I'm doing some work with some prairie plants, Indian cup, compass plant, prairie dock. And I will commonly, either burn it, or sometimes I've got some small plots. I'll just take the ashes from a burn pile, and they just go nuts on that. Just really huge plants, because there's a lot of nutrients in ash. Ash is a great fertilizer. So
yeah, it's very high in potassium. And
yes,
we both know that potassium is one of the most critical nutrients for the vast majority of plant processes. Without it, they suffer horribly.
Right. I'd like to get back though to talking a little bit about nitrogen, if you don't mind.
Yeah. Let's circle back, because we started with the understanding that nitrate takes 5 processes plus carbon, whereas ammonia takes no carbon. It takes water, but no carbon, and it doesn't take any plant processes.
The problem with ammonium is that you got to have too much is toxic, so it's got to be spoon fed. That's the biggest problem with that form of nitrogen. But the other elements that are involved, you always got to have enough sulfur. We always talk about the 10-to-1, and with all the cleanup of the Clean Air Act, we were getting 20 to 30 pounds of sulfur for free in agriculture. I hardly ever see soil tests that are adequate in sulfur anymore. I like to see 20 to 40 parts per million on sulfur. And I just got done looking at a whole bunch of soil tests, and they were all below 10. And you got to have adequate sulfur. Gypsum is a great source. It also helps loosen your soil. So the calcium sulfate is great. But 2 other elements that, if you're going to talk nitrogen, you also got to have, well, 3 actually, but the big ones, got to have enough potassium, and iron is really important in plants for nitrogen metabolism. Something we see here commonly in Ohio, a lot of times in the spring, when we have a cold, wet spring, everybody says, okay, the corn jello, it's got to be nitrogen deficiency. And yeah, that might be part of it, but a lot of times it's iron. And the reason that's so important is iron is the central element for making the enzyme that makes chlorophyll. And the central element to chlorophyll is magnesium. So you got to have adequate iron in the spring, and you got to have adequate magnesium. And especially on sandy soils, you can get that magnesium level too low, and you need to supplement with that. A lot of times we'll supplement with Epsom salt, which is magnesium sulfate, just to get that up just a little bit. I regularly do that on my tomato plants. I will put some fulvic acid and use fulvic acid and put in a little iron. I usually start with iron. I don't mix them, and I'll spray the plants with that, and they'll green up. And then I'll turn right around and put just a little Epsom salt in another solution and spray them, and they'll turn dark green within 24 hours. They just grow like crazy because you got to have the iron to make the chlorophyll, and then you got to have the magnesium to get that to be that central element to the chlorophyll. So those are some things that people need to be thinking about. We don't talk about it much. Part of the problem goes back to our soil test. our soil test, if you ever look at your iron levels, and this is an oxymoron, okay? I hope everybody knows what an oxymoron, it means the opposite. But when I look at iron levels and they're off the chart, that usually means that they're lacking iron. And the reason is because of the valence. Almost all of our nutrients have to be in the 2+ valence, okay? When we get that valence and it's in the wrong form, it'll show very high on a soil test and it can be taken in by the plant. It just can't use it. So it may say 220, 240. I've had some iron levels up there around 300 when normally you want maybe closer to 30 or 40. Okay, is a good number. When I see it at 30 and 40 and see the number come down, that actually means that you're doing a better job than when the numbers are off the chart. Because usually when it's off the chart, it's in the wrong form. And that means that the plant's not taking it, not getting the right form. So that's why you've got to use the soil test with the tissue test. Here's the problem on our soil test and our tissue test. They use total iron, total manganese, and they don't look at all the different valences. What we really need is to have soil tests and tissue tests that split out. Now, of course, that costs more money, but when they split it out better, then you can get a much better view of what's going on. And then I like to use the scouting as kind of the third leg. And then if we got bricks or sap analysis and Haney tests along with it, they all add new information that we can help figure out what's going on with that soil.
Agreed. And just for the audience, so that you understand what he's talking about in valence, this is called bioavailable or non-bioavailable.
Right.
So it depends on how many electrons it has.
Right.
If it has enough electrons, it can share and it can also give one away. And then it becomes, now whatever it gave it to or shared it with now becomes bioavailable.
Right.
So I'm really, excited that you talking these kinds of languages, because so many people don't. They just don't understand electron transfer and sharing and stuff. I mean, there's a war going on down there.
Yes, and I'm not a chemist, but I will say this: it's always that 2+. Every single nutrient that the plant seems to use seems to be in that 2+ valence. And you got some elements like manganese that has a 2+ and a 4+. You have iron that has 2+, 3+, 6+. There could be some other ones. Iron's very complicated. I can remember in college working on a PhD, and we did a computer-generated analysis on iron. Iron is in so many different rock formations, and that thing ran for like 18 hours. I mean, there's just so many different possibilities of what can happen with iron. But iron, here's a new thing. I don't know if this may be new to our audience. Have you seen the latest research on what iron does in the soil in relationship to phosphorus? University of Northwestern University, excuse me, talked about, they were looking at iron, and they said, well, they're first looking at phosphorus, and they were trying to do a budget on phosphorus, and they said, hey, our numbers aren't adding up. We got way more soluble phosphorus out there than we want. There's something missing. So they figured out that iron is a mineral that is releasing the phosphorus from the soil organic matter. And it could be 50% of the soluble or plant available phosphorus in the soil. We're getting it, maybe half of it's coming from microbes, and maybe up to 50% is coming from iron. Now, I've known about this for 10 years. I've been talking about Lake Erie and how we go from the ferric to the ferrous form of iron. And when we do that, that's the ferric is a 3+ down to the 2+. Under saturated soil conditions, that releases soluble reactive phosphorus, okay? And that ends up, a lot of that will end up in Lake Erie, especially when we have wet weather, either runs off the surface or it goes straight down to the tile. But here's the other thing that they kind of forgot is that ferric to ferrous can convert back to ferric when it dries out. And guess what it does? It steals it from calcium and it steals it from other sites and basically remains whole. Interesting thing, 2015 here in Ohio, it just rained all summer long. We got a lot of rain. What do you think happened when they took all the tests? They were testing. Kevin King did some research on this, paired watersheds, and it was raining. What do you think happened with the nitrogen? Well, within 1 or 2 rains, the nitrogen level went way down. A lot of it leached out. What happened with the phosphorus? It stayed the same all summer long. Didn't hardly vary much. Wet, dry. When it was wet, it released it, went into the river. Okay, got into went down through the tile, went into our rivers and streams. Okay, caused a problem in Lake Erie. But then as soon as it dried out just a little bit, it would steal it from calcium or somewhere else. And then all of a sudden, it'd be right back to where it was. Next time it rained, it released the same amount of phosphorus right back into the soil. So the phosphorus level stayed the same no matter how much rain it seemed like we got that year. It stayed the same. And that's something I think farmers need to take into account on no-till. We have a higher concentration of soluble phosphorus from the microbes, but if you got high iron contents or even a fair amount of iron in your soils, you're also getting phosphorus from there. We typically see 20% higher phosphorus concentrations in the soil. Now, the question that I have to ask you is, does that automatically mean that no-till fields leach more phosphorus? And the answer is, it depends. If I have a system where I don't have cover crops and I've got the macropores down, it can very easily leach out and that can cause a problem. But we know our long-term no-till with the cover crop fields, what happens is the phosphorus goes down, the roots are all spread out there, they grab onto that phosphorus and they recycle it and keep it from going out. And the water is clear coming out of the tile lines or coming off those fields. So it depends on how long you've been in no-till, and even better, really what's most important is no-till with a cover crop, which mimics Mother Nature. It mimics that natural system, keeping a live plant on the soil year round. And when we do that, that's when we get our best nutrient recycling. Okay. But when we break that, yes, more roots is in the soil is a key. I see your little note there, and that is great. Yeah, that's exactly what we want. It's not only the live roots though, but most of your organic matter comes from the dead roots. Probably 80%, 85% of the organic matter is what's below ground rather than what's on the soil surface. Soil surface is important for that armor to keep it so it doesn't erode, but for nutrient recycling, most of your organic matter is coming from roots and dead roots and plant materials.
Plant residues. Yep.
So once I get going, it's hard to stop me.
Hey, we're all about the rants here, and
I've been told I'm like a fire hose. It just comes pouring out. So.
It's called waterboarding.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
So interestingly enough, a lot of people don't understand that phosphorus in an organic form is very difficult to break. Mm-hmm. And that it typically takes aquatic microorganisms, i.e. phosphate solubilizing bacteria,
right,
to actually break them open so that they can be released to the plant.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm really glad that you bring that up. And to be honest with you, that's like so many of the other nutrients in our soil. Technically, all we need is microbes to farm our soils. We could without doing anything, have high yields for thousands of years.
Yeah.
And that goes back to, it's all about the biology.
But I'll make an analogy here. If you go down to the South, and what do we typically see in the South? Very red soils, high in iron. Okay. And what happens when they're high in iron? Well, if we get a rain, a lot of that can leach away. They also tend to be low in phosphorus after a while because there's not enough organic matter in those sandy red soils and to keep that phosphorus, to keep it tied up. And a lot of times they're lower in phosphorus just because they got such high iron levels there. So, that balance is what's really important. The higher you get your organic matter is kind of like your mom. She just takes care of everything. If you need something, she's going to give it to you in small doses. And that's exactly what we need in agriculture. And unfortunately, the more tillage we do, we get away from that concept, the worse that problem, worse the problems come. Okay.
Oh, agreed 100%. I mean, if you look back at history, I think the Romans showed you could literally till off all of the topsoil or the O horizon, the most important part, within just a matter of a few years.
Yes.
And that's essentially what we've done both to the Great Prairies. We turned them into a dust bowl.
Yes.
But then the whole central part of the country, we also have destroyed that O horizon too. I think Gabe Brown said it best. It's like in the winter, you drive around, look at who's got dirty soil. And you laugh and say, "Oh, you're lucky. You got dirty snow. So that means when the snow melts, you're going to get all that silt that this."
Call that snort.
Yeah,
snort.
Yeah,
snow and dirt. Yeah, snort. Yeah,
I love that.
Yeah, snort.
So you're lucky. You got the snort, and he lost.
Oh, I've been to Minnesota, and they taught me about snort. So that they had some of the. I was in Minnesota. I don't want to pick on anybody from Minnesota, but they do a lot of plowing there. They plow their soybeans. They plow their corn. And I asked them, I said, "Boy, you guys got beautiful soils here. They're really dark black." And I said, I'll bet you get really good yields. And they kind of said, "Well, not always. If it gets dry, we just don't get very good. We don't get 250 bushel corn." So we did a little digging and come to find out that where they're doing that conventional, they only have a pot of soil that's about 6 inches deep because they have such a hard pan there that the roots couldn't get. They do J roots. They would go off at a right-hand angle. But where they had no-till or no-till in a cover crop, when it would get dry, those roots could go down 3-4 feet deep and could get moisture. And those crops would look great. And they would get 250 bushel year in and year out. But for some reason in Minnesota, they like clean fields. And boy, they till the band out, at least the areas that I was, and they really till it. And, if you do that long enough, I don't care how deep your organic matter levels are, you're going to lose it. I know in Iowa, they estimate that they've lost, on average, let me say certain areas for sure have lost 15 inches of topsoil. But they had such deep organic soils that, they didn't think much of it. But, hey, sooner or later, you're going to run out of that organic matter. And when you do, then it's not going to be so good. When I hit the table, it falls off. There we go. We're back.
That's all good. Your excitement is a pleasure, my friend. It's a real pleasure. To see the wealth of knowledge water hosing out of you is amazing. You've clearly done the work. I mean, that's obvious. And so, let's bounce into calcium because that, like you said, should be on the top 4, and it actually should be 5. It should be C, N, P, calcium, and then potassium, K.
Yes.
So I think that is the sweet spot. And since I've been doing a lot of work over the years, people always go, "Well, what's the NPK? What's the NPK?" And it used to make me really mad because I'm like, "No, I'm doing soil food web. We don't do NPK. We don't need NPK." But then I started coming around saying, it's not. I shouldn't get mad at them because at least they're starting to understand chemistry. Right?
Yes.
And soil needs to be looked at in 3 parts: physical, which is the sand, silt, clay, and organic matter; chemistry, and then finally biology. If you have all 3 of those things, you're going to have a sweet spot. You're going to do well.
Yeah.
So then I started introducing, like, when a person says, "Well, what's the NPK?" I say, "You mean what's the CNPK?"
Yeah.
They scratch their head and they go, well, what do you mean? I go, well, carbon, right? Everybody's talking about carbon. And without carbon, your N isn't going to work. And that starts the conversation in a whole new direction. Now, all of a sudden, they're interested. Now they're not like insulted. They're not, frustrated. They're like, oh, I hadn't really thought about that.
Mm-hmm.
And then eventually, by the end of the conversation, I switch it to, now I really want you to think about this. I want you to think about C, free NPK and biology.
Right.
Because we don't need the NPK. We already have the NPK in the soil. We just are missing the biology. And the reason you're missing the biology is because of your cultural practices of tilling and killing. Yeah. And then all of a sudden the lights go off and you're like, well, hey, since you've done the damage, now how do we regenerate your soil is the conversation we should be having. Yeah. Because you're just going to have to dump more and more and more N every year, knowing that half of it's going to get washed away because there's no organisms and there's no carbon to break it down and release it. And the plant's too weak to have burned 4 processes, all that ATP, to break that nitrogen open so that it can actually use it.
And I remember, we talked about this. You always had the 3 concentric circles, the chemical, the physical, the biology. I'm going to go off base here, and you can disagree with me if you want, but I think that I don't think those circles are exactly even. I think biology trumps them all, and I think it should look like a Mickey Mouse with 2 ears on it, bigger, with the ears being so close together, kind of a mixed up, screwed up Mickey Mouse is what I think. That's my personal opinion.
I'm with you, dude. I'm with you 100%, brother. 100%.
Because if you look at what I got more questions wrong on this when I went to college later in life, and I would argue with my professor. I'll tell you what, when you go back to school when you're 45, you scare the bejeebers out of your professors because you have some experience. You ask very pointed. And I mean, I could just see the deer in the headlight look on some of these professors' faces. Like, oh my gosh, this guy actually knows something. He's got really good. I had a couple guys come to me and say, Jim, we love having you in class, but you really slow us down. You know that with all your questions. But think about it. When you look at the chemical, all chemical, a lot of that is related to the biology. Now, I did just say here on phosphorus that maybe 50% of the phosphorus is coming from iron. But if you look at like the chemical things that are going on, that biology has a huge impact on the chemistry. And the same way on the physics. If you don't have the biology, have the organic matter and all the glues that are giving us good soil structure, I just think it's kind of a messed up Mickey Mouse with the 2 circles real close together overlapping in this big head that is biology. I think biology really swamps everything. That's my personal opinion. I do not like the 3 concentric circles, but I'll emphasize the biology every time. Okay.
I think you're onto it, my friend.
Okay. Yeah. Maybe we'll have to revise that and put our own little version out there. I'm sure we'll get a lot of blowback from somebody on that, but
well,
my wife, she just got home from work, so
it's all good. Tell her we said hi.
Hi, Marlene. Everybody says hi. So.
Yep. Hi.
Hey, here we go.
So
hey, we're having fun.
In talking about that too, is that understanding that the physical, the sand, silt, and clay component is also the chemistry, and we haven't really talked about CEC, and CEC is the number one way to hold your nutrients and not let them leach or mobilize. So,
and what has the highest CEC in the soil?
Clay. Well, organic matter too.
There you go. You caught yourself. Organic matter trumps everything else.
Well, I mean, it holds both anions and cations.
Yes, and it's huge. It's huge. And we don't talk about that enough on how important you can change your CEC in the soil. They always used to say that. I would argue that in class. I said that's BS. When you say you cannot change your CEC in the soil, Yes, you can if you build the organic matter levels high enough. They'd always argue, well, you can't do that. And I said, well, not farming the way we do today. No-till and cover crops in order to get that back. You got to mimic Mother Nature. And when you do that, I mean, we lost a great guy here in Ohio, Dave Brandt. You probably knew Dave Brandt, or you knew who he was.
Probably heard of him over the years.
Okay, so Dave was, they did a lot of memes on him. He was a great big guy, probably weighed 350 pounds, big overhauls, talked about soil health all over the country and even in Europe, France and Australia, United Kingdom, all over the place. So, but he was just a country guy, okay? But Dave has some soils. NRCS, Natural Resource Conservation Service, came out and checked his fields and said, Dave, I don't know what you've done, but you've changed your soil in the 20 years of using no-till and a cover crop. It is, he had a soil, he raised the organic matter level so much that it became like a mollisol. He had a Utisol or Alpha-sol. I forget which one it was. I think it was an Alpha-sol. And he raised the organic matter level so much that he had organic matter down 30 inches deep. And his neighbor, 30 feet away, had organic matter only in the top 2 inches. And now Dave has organic matter all the way down. They said, we would have to classify this as a different soil. And Dave just said, well, why don't you call it Brandt soil? Because it's on my farm, And probably one of the few guys that has actually changed his soil for the better. I had a good friend of mine. He retired from NRCS right before I got there. And just for his last day on the job, you know what he did? He helped with doing all the soil books, going out and the soil surveys of all the different soils in kind of east of the Mississippi. What's that?
Soil taxonomy.
Yeah, soil taxonomy, exactly. So he went out and he said, I want to just see how much our soils have changed in, say, the 30, 40 years since I last tested. So he went to every, not every site, but he went to a sampling of sites. And when he came back, he was shaking his head. He said, you know what? If I were doing this today, I would have to reclassify those soils and I would have to lower them by 2, 3, 4 points. Some cases where they were moderately eroded, now they're severely eroded. Other places, the organic matter was maybe 3, 4%. Now it's 1 to 2%. And he said, the majority of our farmers, we maybe have 100 years left, but the majority of our farmers, we're degrading, we're mining our soils. And at some point in time, it's going to catch up with us. And we really need to.
It already has in many cases.
Oh, it has. Yeah, there's no doubt about that. It has. But it's going to get worse. It's going to get a lot worse. And as we go towards 2050, the year 2050, we're looking at 10 billion people. We're at about 8 right now. That's a 25% increase. 2 divided by 8. That's 25% increase in food production that we need at a minimum by 2050. And we're not going to do that by wasting our resources and mining our soils. We're going to have to find a way to take care of that. So,
and I think we have it. The problem is money.
Yeah,
the money is choked the farmer out to a point where he can't reinvest anything in his property.
Right.
And so that money harvesting, is in return harvesting the soil.
Yeah.
And harvesting our time and our health. So it's bad, and that's the limiting factor.
I got some numbers in my head, but gosh, I haven't thought about them for a while. The amount of soil that we have lost. I haven't given that presentation, but it is tremendous. The amount of soil that we're losing on a yearly basis right now. And boy, I wish I should have looked that up before I did this. But let's get back to you wanted to talk about calcium. And I do think there's some really good things about calcium, but I do it a little differently than you do. I get into associations, elements that are associated with each other. And whenever I talk calcium, I have to talk boron, because the boron is how you get the calcium in. So a lot of times I will start with boron and make sure you got that at a good level. And, there's a real easy way to check for boron deficiency. Let's use corn. If you look at a corn leaf, okay, and you look on the outside edges, you'll see these parallel tracks. I call them railroad tracks, just dashes. Whenever you see parallel dashes on the outside of a corn plant, that's boron deficiency. When you look from the mid vein to the outside edge and it's a little crinkled, or you'll see some dashes, that's calcium deficiency. Now, sometimes calcium deficiency can be due to a lack of boron. Sometimes it's just due to a lack of calcium. So you got to look at your base saturations and kind of look at those two elements. But the reason calcium is so important is calcium, if you remember, was that fulcrum, but it increases your roots, your root length, your root size, the size of your stems, and also your leaves. So you've got to have adequate calcium in order to have adequate photosynthesis. And then the other place where calcium is really important is inside the grain. If you want to have higher test weights, and if you want to store fruit for a longer period of time, you got to have extremely high calcium levels. They've learned about this in the apple industry, okay? In the apples, they will test apples for calcium content. They have a low calcium content, they're going to make those into juice, or they're going to sell them really quick because they know they're not going to store. If you have a really high calcium content, those are your long keepers, and they can store them longer. Interesting story. I don't know if you know Steve Groff from Pennsylvania. So Steve has been doing no-till cover crops, really getting into it. He's real close to New York, some of those markets. But he stored some squash down his basement. And the neighbor said, "Hey, do you mind if I store some of mine?" Steve said, "Sure." So they had 2 baskets of squash. He forgot about them, went back, I don't know, maybe about 2 months later. Oh, there was a tremendous stench down the basement. So he went and he thought, okay, all my squash are gone. Well, he went and looked at the neighbors, and his basket of squash were just rotten, just putrid. He went and looked at his. He has really good soil health, good calcium levels, everything, good boron. His squash were absolutely perfect. Picked the same day, different farms, but because he had higher calcium, it'll store longer, okay? And calcium also is what makes your fruit a little sweeter. We've always said, if you want to sweeten the soil, put some lime on it. That's calcium carbonate, and that will raise your pH. If you don't want to raise your pH and just want to increase your calcium levels, put on gypsum, which is calcium sulfate. And that will help. And you got to have adequate sulfur along with that nitrogen. And then you got the iron, the potassium, and then we get into the molybdenum and the nickel. All those are important when you're going to talk about nitrogen metabolism in the plants. So
you forgot one.
Zinc. Oh, I probably did. What was that?
Zinc.
Zinc, yes. Zinc too. Yes. Yep. Sorry.
That's all right. No, hey, that's why we do this. We talk about it, and we enlighten the audience as a whole, because there's so much to this that it's so easy to forget one little piece or a whole component of it, right?
Yeah.
Like the.
And why is zinc so important? I think we ought to talk just a hair bit about zinc. Zinc is one of the best elements for disease. If you have adequate zinc, look at Zicam. If you have a cold, just take Zicam, because Zicam, the bacteria, what zinc does is it breaks down the cell walls on the viruses and the bacteria. Okay. And that's why when, we had this recent pandemic, everybody couldn't taste and smell. That was a lack of zinc. You got to have adequate zinc, and zinc will help you to break down the cell walls on a lot of these disease organisms. So whenever you've got a lot of disease, and we have a lot of diseases going out there right now, tar spot here in the Midwest that are starting to creep in, and all these things, I commonly see zinc deficiency. Zinc, somebody said zinc's really important for human health. I agree with that. But
we used to get it in our food.
Yes, but most of our soils are lacking zinc anymore. One of the ways you can look for zinc deficiency is on a really healthy, I'll use corn again. On a really healthy corn plant, it should be dark green. And a lot of times what we'll see now is a lot of times the midrib is really white. The whiter that midrib is, the whiter, but that means you got zinc deficiency. On really, really healthy corn, it won't be white. Now, there are some variety differences, okay? So it's a little hard to tell, but if you want to look for zinc deficiency, look to see how white your corn ribs are. And if you got a really dark green, wide leaf, that's what's really important. We found out something new also on photosynthesis. We already knew this on wheat. The flag leaf, that's where closest to the head, we knew the flag leaf had to be disease-free. Same thing applies to corn and to soybeans. Corn, that leaf, where that ear is, that has to be healthy because that's like 75 to 80% of the carbohydrates going into that ear of corn. Now in soybeans, well, there's a lot of pods, there's a lot of leaves. So I guess we just say all the leaves got to be real big and healthy, but it's a little harder to pinpoint it on soybeans. But corn is just like wheat. It's really important that you keep that flag leaf. You want it really wide, you want it really long, and you want it to be really healthy if you want to have higher yields. And I'm in the Midwest, so I got to talk about corn and soybeans, even though the prices are in the dumper right now. So
are they really?
Oh yeah. Corn a couple years ago was up to $7. We're now around $3.50. Soybeans were up to 15. Now we're down 10. And what's really hurting us right now, Brazil. My son went to Brazil when he was in college, and they are trying to add another 50% to their land base, Amazon forest. They're burning it down. And as they do that, they're getting more and more land into production, and they're getting more and more railroads and infrastructure. And the next thing that they want to do, they told my son this, he said, we're doing soybeans. Now we're going to corn. The next thing is we're going to become the livestock producers of the world in Brazil. So that's kind of a scary thought for us in the United States, because that's a lot of competition coming from South America down there. And
well, to be honest with you, I don't believe they're going to ever accomplish that because their soils are not suitable for that type of production. They can hydroponic it, right? But everybody's going to get sick. The farmers are going to get sick. The animals are going to get sick. The plants are going to be attacked by pests. They're going to plume.
Yeah, but here's where they're ahead of us in the United States. So I'm going to give you the flip side of your argument, okay?
Okay.
They're doing long-term no-till immediately, along with very high-density cover crops. They burn off those nutrients, and they put out cover crops, and they have a lot of water, okay? They're getting 60 inches of water. So they're growing 2 crops a year, and they're building their organic matter levels up to really great levels that I could argue with you that they're doing a much better job than we are in the United States. A lot of ours goes down the river and gets into the ocean. They're keeping theirs in place. They burn the trees. I'm not saying I agree with it. I don't agree with it, but they're burning the trees. They immediately get cover crops on there, and they've got a system. And then in some cases, they're even pasturing that land, long-term pasture. And because of the moisture and the long growing season, they're just building organic matter tremendously. And that's the advantage they have over us. It's a little scary. Now it is pretty hot. It is hot down there, and you burn off organic matter faster. But as long as you keep that soil covered and you keep it growing something, they're pretty closely mimicking Mother Nature. So that's a little bit of a scary thought for our not only Ohio, but our USA farmers. We got to be thinking about that. We need to be going that same route. And again, it all goes back to the biology, everything you're talking about. And
well, I think it's worse than that. It goes back to the money. Because if the farmers were allowed to make money and put money back into their fields, then we wouldn't be having these issues. And you're right. I mean, when you say, oh, well, they're cover cropping and, you know, they've got a lot of water, they've got 2 seasons a year. You're right. That is a scary competition. And if they really are approaching it this way, then they won't even change the weather cycles. And therefore, in that regard, there'll be another jump ahead.
Right. They're you know, I had one of my professors, Dr. Saul, was from Brazil. And, you know, it was one of those 3-hour courses. It was a seminar. And one of my advisors, he really had to bend my arm. He said, Jim, you really should go to this. He only has like 7 guys signed up. I said, I don't really, it's late in the afternoon. I don't really want to go. It's on a Tuesday and a Thursday. I got a 2-hour trip back. Man, am I glad he about broke my arm, because it was one of the best courses I've ever taken. Really good discussion, just like we're doing. And I challenged him. He challenged me. Oh, we had fun. But he really, some of their professors down there, most of agriculture down there is farmed with no-till and a cover crops. They even raise their own nitrogen. They will plant corn, and then they'll turn around, and after the corn just starts to come up, they'll put in sun hemp, and they'll grow the sun hemp with the corn. You can get 200 pounds of nitrogen out of sun hemp. They'll let the sun hemp grow, and when the sun hemp gets above the corn, and as the corn's drying down, they'll go and harvest the sun hemp above the corn, and then they'll come back and they'll harvest the corn. So they put in skip rows where the combine's going to go, but they actually get 2 crops, and they get all their nitrogen. They get majority of their nitrogen is coming from that 200 pounds of sun hemp there. So he was teaching us this whole system, this intercropping, and he had some that, you know, they had 23 different crops, and they were always intercropping one into another, and just how economical that was and how low inputs that was, mimicking what's going on really in the forest. So you know, a lot of guys now are getting into intercropping wheat, soybeans, and doing different things to try to get more roots in the soil, and also get more than one crop a year. And that's how you're going to have to make it in agriculture. So,
agreed. We have to change our evil ways.
Yeah,
we have to. And unfortunately, again, money's the only limiting factor.
And
so we can get.
I think we would do better if the government got out of it and just let the farmer, because once the government was out of it, we would have to learn how to do it with less inputs, and it would change it faster than if we keep, you know, just doling out the money. Because unfortunately, most of the money goes to the really large farmers, and the small guys don't get that much anyway. So
exactly my point. Exactly my point. Right. It's not about the money. It's about the money. Right.
Yeah.
So who's getting it? Right. If the little guys got all the money and the big guys had to suck wind, that would work, because now the little guys would get the subsidies to improve their soil, and then they could afford to lease more land from the bigger farmers and start to take the whole thing back. I mean, you're old enough to remember Farm Aid. We lost all of the friggin' farmers. They all have big corporations that are owned by this, you know, Vanguard and friggin' big BlackRock and all the other bastards. So that's the problem. Is right there in a nutshell. It's all about profits to them, where it was a livelihood to the farmers that were actually doing the work.
Right.
And we lost them all for the most part, you know, except for the people that are willing to gamble. I mean, the farmers are bigger gamblers than the fucking card player.
Yeah,
right?
It is a gamble.
They bet everything on pulling in this crop and praying to God the weather cooperates and they don't get hailstorm or a tornado can come in and tear their field down.
You know, when we talk a little bit about climate change, and climate change is something that's been going on since the beginning of time. Okay,
of course,
we're in a warming trend. We've been in a warming trend for 128,000 years when the glaciers started to melt. Okay, so it's just gradually increasing. Unfortunately, a lot of people act like we're going off the cliff, and we're in a cycle right now. I don't know if you realize it, but we're at a solar maximum right now, either this year or next year. It's very similar to the 1930s. We had a strong La Nina, and when you have a really strong La Nina, that's followed by a strong El Nino, okay? Generally, that's what happens. And most of the time, they're just kind of medium, intermediate, but, you know, the 1930s was the driest on record and also the hottest. And that's been almost 100 years ago. But, you know, there's an interesting thing, and we haven't talked about this. So I don't know if our listeners have ever heard this or not, but they estimate that drought in 1930s lasted 4 years longer than normal. You have any idea why? Why did that happen?
Bare soil.
It had to do with soil. They plowed all the prairies, and when they did that, what they've come to find out is that there's 67. It's probably more than that now, but I know this is a year or two old. This information. There's 67 species of Pseudomonas bacteria that get up into the atmosphere to cause it to rain. Okay, that's a big dirt. You know, soil will do that. Dirt particles will help, but they're figuring out, well, when you got rid of all the prairies, you lost all the microbes. And they saw this in Kansas last year. As the fronts were coming through Kansas, western Kansas is always very dry, but when it hit the, I believe it's the Kansas River, there's a bunch of trees there. And on the other side, when you go from west to east, when you got to the east side, all of a sudden they were getting rain. So forested areas, think about this. When you go to Brazil in the Amazon forest, what happens at about almost every day at about 3 o'clock?
Right.
They get a 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch of rain. And so what happens is the trees are doing evapotranspiration. The microbes go up into the atmosphere. When they hit a certain elevation, it starts to rain, and about 3, 4 o'clock, somewhere around there, they get a 1/2 inch, rain comes down. Well, what happens in the United States? We've got so much bare ground that the moisture builds up, and when it comes, what happens to it? It either ends up in the ocean, or it comes down in 3, 4, and 5 inch rains, just delusions. You know, just really comes down like cats and dogs. So if we were to get this cycle back again, where we did no-till and cover crops, had live plants putting off microbes all the time, we would get smaller rains. We'd get more of those $1 million rains, that 1/2 inch, 1 inch, even up to 2 inches. If it comes down all day, it's just perfect. Okay, but here's what we get in Ohio. It's not uncommon to get a 3, 4, 5 inch rain. Sometimes we're getting 7 inch rains now, just dumping in one spot. And that doesn't do anybody any good. A lot of nutrients lost, a lot of soils lost, crops lost. And then somebody like me, I'm kind of in an area, I've had maybe 5, 6 inches of rain all summer long. Okay. And I'm not getting enough. Whereas if we had more even distribution of the microbes up in the atmosphere, it would rain more often, smaller amounts, wet, dry, wet, dry, wet, dry. That's going to be better for agriculture all the way around. It's just almost like a built-in irrigation system.
Well, the other piece of that puzzle is that when the corporate takeovers of the farms, they mow down all the fucking tree lines. all the windbreaks. And those windbreaks did exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah. Yep.
They provided that influx of pseudomonas up into the atmosphere.
Yep.
Kind of like cloud seeding. And worse yet, now we got Tornado Alley down.
Yes.
Because they mowed down all the ability for the surface of the soil to prevent that kind of weather system. And those weather systems are directly related to the temperature of the soil, because the temperature of the soil, when it's uncovered, gets up into the 100 degrees, and now it's shooting off like it's called convection. So you get above clouds away.
Yeah, you get above 130, 140 degrees, it's going to kill your biology in the soil. So we regularly, where we've got no-till and cover crops, the soil temperature will be, 75 to 85 on a really hot, sunny day. And you can go over to a bare soil and it'll be anywhere from 120 all the way up to 140.
Yeah, you can fry an egg on the fucking shit.
Yeah, almost. Yep, pretty much.
Well, soft boil, right?
We've messed up our water cycle, and we've messed up the biology, and that's just because of the way modern agriculture is going that way, and we really need to change that. It needs to be changed, but it's a hard sell. Once you ruin something, it's a little bit like I don't know how old some of our guys are, but if you remember Katrina in the Gulf of Mexico,
of course,
what was the worst day? Was it when the water broke over the dam, over the barriers they had there? Or was it about 3-4, maybe days, or even 2-3 weeks after that, when they ran out of water and they ran out of food? That's when it really got critical. It's the same way with the soil. Okay, if we were to stop today, it's still going to be in a degraded state. It takes at least 5 to 7 years, can take 10 years to restore your soil. Most of our farmers just aren't that patient. And until you get that soil where it's fully functioning, we get all those services, ecological services back, the microbes and everything, the nutrient recycling, all that. It takes a little while to build that back. And unfortunately, most guys will give up after about 2 or 3 years if they're making less money. I'd really like to see, if we had a government program, I'd like to see them, instead of doing 2-3 years out, that's usually a 4-year cycle. They'll do a 2 or 3 year program. We probably need a 10-year program. For 10 years, we'll take care of your risk. We'll pay for, if crop prices go down and your net profit goes down until you get over the hump. But then after that 10 years, you have to agree to at least a 20, 30, 40-year time period where you're going to do no-till and cover crops. And then we'll give the money to the next guy to help him make that transition, get us back so we get our soil back in place.
I agree. That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense.
Another idea I had, although I don't want to be credited with this one, I'd probably get hung by a lot of our farmers. But, if let's say we have a conventional, we have a no-till guy, and we have a no-till with a cover crop. Now, I think you and I can agree that the goal is the no-till and the cover crop, full biology. What if we said, and I don't know what kind of tax, but I'm not a big tax guy, so that's why this one's, could get you in trouble. But let's just say if you're a no-till, you have zero tax. And let's just say, for the sake of argument, if you had a conventional tilled field, we're going to take $10 away, or 20, whatever the magic number is, of your farm payments. Now, let's say 80% of the guys are in that conventional. Let's say 10% are in the no-till, and let's say 10% are in the no-till with the cover crop. All the money we get from the conventional guys, we're going to give to the no-till and the cover croppers. How long do you think it would take for this needle to start changing towards at least no-till, where I didn't get taxed, to a no-till with a cover crop? Now, as you get further and further along, the benefits are going to go down, and it may even out. But you know what? You may not have 100% adoption, but you're going to get a lot of guys moving in that direction. And that's right now, we don't have market forces that are forcing us or pushing us. Shouldn't say forcing, but pushing us in the right direction. And that's something that I think we ought to be thinking about if we wanted to have policy on But Farm Bill is coming up, and those are things we should probably be thinking about how we can make this system work better for all farmers. And that's farm neutral too. That's acreage neutral on that. So that's what's nice about it.
Yeah, I think that's an absolute wonderful idea. And let me back this up a bit. I have a good friend of mine, client over in Beecher, Illinois, who's corn and he's had some success with biological transition. He tried cover cropping. He got convinced to use rye, which was a bad decision. Do you have another cover crop other than clover? Because for whatever reason they rape you on the clover seeds that he can use that can be crimped in the spring when he needs to plant without fighting it.
So he doesn't like clovers. Is that what you said?
No, the clover is too expensive.
Okay.
It's outrageous over there. I don't know why.
Well, so where's he at? Where's he located?
Beecher, Illinois.
Beecher. Well, a good cover crop that's really fairly cheap is like Valencia clover. Valencia clover runs about $2.50 a pound. 4 or 5 pounds of Valencia. It's a very, very small seed. There's like 500,000 to 1 million seeds per pound. So when you think about that, you put that, it's very shallow. You broadcast that across your soil. That can give you, if you get a good stand, now you got to inoculate it. But if you inoculate that, you can get up to 200 pounds of nitrogen out of Valencia clover. Some guys are using crimson clover. Crimson clover is a little harder to kill. It's not as winter hardy. What I like about the Valencia is it's winter hardy, takes really cold temperatures. It has a hollow stem. It takes wet soil. So Valencia is good. Another one that is really good for the soil, mycorrhizae and fungus and all the beneficials is oats. And oats and sorghum are two of my favorite cover crops. Now, most of the time, our spring oats are going to die out, but you can also get winter oats, and winter oats will go down to about single digits, and they may or may not survive the year, and then you could terminate them. And sometimes, just having oats in the rotation, I always like to get oats somewhere in the rotation somehow. Even if they die out, they're really beneficial. Most of our mycorrhizae, I got a whole PowerPoint just on mycorrhizal fungi. There's like 150 up to 250 species of mycorrhizae fungi. There are some mycorrhizae that take this much carbon and give us this much benefit. There's other ones that take this much carbon and they only give us just a little bit of benefit. And unfortunately, when we do conventional tillage, those are the ones that take a lot of carbon. They're almost a disease organism, and they don't give us that much benefit. The real sensitive mycorrhizae need about 7, 8, 9 months of live crops growing in order to complete their life cycle. So if you can interseed plant corn, soybeans, and then interseed a cover crop into that, and then lengthen your growing season out so you keep that soil covered with something living and growing, that allows some of these really beneficial mycorrhizae to complete their life cycle and get them up. And that's also where fish emulsions, you talked about the fish. There's arginine is the amino acid in fish emulsions, and that's really important for opening up that plant to infection by these mycorrhizae. Okay, and I'm sure you've talked about the rhizophagy. Are you familiar with rhizophagy?
Oh yeah, Dr.
Rhizophagy, and even soybeans making nitrogen, the rhizobacteria, they all use that amino acid arginine and to open up that root. Okay, and so whenever you do this, all these processes are related to each other. I really am looking at ways that we can use some of these amino acids to help improve crop growth. I think that's something that's going to be the next one.
So I think it's important to state the difference between fish emissions, fish emulsions, and fish hydrolysates.
Okay, sorry.
No, just because
Yeah.
I'm a hydrolysate guy. I want the oils. I want the omegas. I want everything. I don't want shit stripped off and me get a subpar product. And so Kyle's had some tremendous success with both the hydrolysate he gets from the East Coast from Fish Brew, as well as the hydrolysates coming from Pacific Grow, who's done a good job over the years. Although, interestingly enough, Pacific Grow is stealing some of the oil now, which really sucks.
Okay.
Because he got totes from both, and in prior years, you'd get a 6-8 inch separation of the oils at the top, and and then you have to mix it. So it was like a process. Well, this year when he got his tote, he didn't have that big separation layer. So just heads up, people, know your products, understand the company, understand their motivation. I mean, that's what made Pacific Grow famous, was the product results. Yeah. And if they start stealing oil and they don't get the product results, well, they've basically, stolen money from the people that buy it. Yeah. And so just heads up again, these are important things. Well, now, typically at this point in time, we stop talking and we start answering questions. And you have quite a few questions here, my friend. You have 8, and we only have half an hour to get through it. All right. We'll definitely have to have you back on a future show, maybe right after harvest when things slow down for you. Sure. And we can finish this conversation because there were so many things that we touched on that we didn't follow up on.
Oh, I know. Yeah, it's hard to. What I like about my PowerPoints is I got everything organized. Where here I'm just scatterbrained. It's all over the place. So. No,
it's fine. I personally like this. I like to have a conversation, not a presentation. It's more entertaining. It's you're both getting some knowledge and you're getting a couple laughs and you're getting some fun that's happening as a result of it. So no, I like this informal way better than I like the formal presentation. So we'll definitely have to have you back on. All right, Ken, you got the mic, brother. I'll shut up.
Okay. Well, we got Kay starting us off here. What's the best way for a plant to absorb calcium, foliar or soil applied?
Usually you're going to get the majority of your calcium from the soil, okay? But when you have really compacted soils, you don't have real good organic matter and those things, most of our calcium, I guess, is going to come from the soils. But on some of our other micronutrients, it's not the volume. You're going to get less volume, and it's going to be a little more expensive. But if you use foliars, you can fix that problem really quick. And it's a little more expensive, and you're not using the volume. There's just not as much. But the problem is when you just apply it to the soil, if you have a problem in your soil and you don't fix it, at least on the micronutrients, same way with calcium, if it's not in the right form or it's being tied up some way, chances are you're not going to get to use all of it anyway. So it's kind of, I like to do both, but on calcium, most of it's going to come from the soil. Trying to think of any calcium products that I'm using. A lot of times we'll put a little calcium in. You got to be careful with calcium because I use there's a chart. What's that called? Muller's chart. You got to look at all the interactions that go on. You never want to put calcium in with your phosphorus because the calcium will tie up your phosphorus. So you just have to be real careful about that. Usually a lot of the micronutrients, though, will foliar apply if we see deficiencies. And you can put some in the soil, but again, if you don't have good organic matter levels, a lot of times it's just going to get tied up and it may not be. You may not be getting all the use out of it. Hopefully that makes sense.
No, I think you hit the head on the nail. It's basically site specific. It's what you up against. It is. Yeah. And again, if you use too much gypsum, you're going to create soil crust instead of loosening. So everything is low and slow. Don't be a moron, right?
Yeah. And what's the best form of calcium? And like you mentioned, gypsum already.
Well, calcium, I believe only it only has one valence. It's 2+. So calcium sulfate. If let's put it this way, if you have a low pH, you're going to use lime. If you have a high pH and your calcium, your base saturation isn't where you want it. Here in the Midwest, we like to be about 65 to 70%. Then you're going to use gypsum. And the benefit of using gypsum is you also get the sulfur, because generally we're almost always low in sulfur. And then when you get extra calcium in your soil, then it will also loosen your soil. It tends to, in our soils, it tends to loosen. Our clay soils, calcium. Too much magnesium, if you get the base saturation too high, makes our soils tight. So, but then you get into, okay, do I use high calcium or low mag? I guess high calcium, low magnesium lime, or do I use just regular lime, which tends to be higher in magnesium? That all goes back to whatever your magnesium levels are. We like to keep it in somewhere between the 15 to 20%. And I just got done doing a whole bunch of soil analysis, and he had some soils in the same field. Some of it he needed high cal lime, and some of it he needed and low magnesium. Others he needed just a regular lime. So it really can vary depending on how many soil types you got and what the conditions are in the field. But it makes it a nightmare when you want to put it on a field if you're doing a lot of grid sampling. So that's where you get into problems. No.
Well said. And let's not forget dolomitic and calcitic limes too. Those are also tools in the toolbox.
Yeah.
Again, very, very site specific. Come on.
Yeah. So Case wanted to know, do you make your own plant amendments or mix bought products?
Usually, I do some little bit of compost teas. Sometimes I'll do that. The best thing, there are some, if you're going to use compost, what you want to do is add worms. Get the red wigglers. Those red wigglers have close to 10,000 beneficial microbes in it. And I know everybody talks about the earthworms and how great they are. I'd have nothing wrong with that. They really help with the deep. But those red wigglers, if you really want to store a field, get some red wigglers. What you have to do is put them in a compost pile, and you can't overturn it. You start off with compost and you turn it, regularly for maybe 2 months. Then you just let it set for about 9 months. And if you can get some red wigglers in there and get them growing, boy, does that make good compost tea. And you're going to have 10,000 beneficial microbes. Okay. And there's a side story to this. Dr. Johnson has done that Sioux reactor. You guys familiar with that?
Bioreactor, yeah.
So he found a microbe there. Maybe you've already heard this. That was pink, very filamentous. They couldn't find it anywhere in the literature. They finally found it. Guess who saw it first? And is the only known place that they've ever had it described. Louis Pasteur must not have taken real good notes, but he must have taken a sample from some really good compost and described it. And that's the last time it was ever in the literature. But that's a really beneficial, this pink filamentous bacteria. The microbes in the bacteria you get.
I think you're talking about purple sulfur bacteria.
Okay. What's that?
What that is that lives in all the different trophs.
Okay.
To aerobic.
Okay.
Benefits are limitless.
Yeah. So when you get those in your soil, you're just going to see. I know Dr. Johnson and Sue, his wife, Dr. Sue, I believe is her name. They were saying that they were only putting on 50 pounds of nitrogen, and they were getting the equivalent of 150 pounds of nitrogen out of this good compost. So has a lot of benefit, a lot of good enzymes in it. Just a lot of good things in there that it does make a difference how you make your compost and your compost teas. So, yep, that's another whole talk, probably.
Yep.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Probably somebody with more knowledge than me.
Leighton, are you saying purple sulfur or purple non-sulfur, which I think is basically the same thing?
No, they're different types.
Okay.
Types, and that's something that Leif Olson is working on. he actually discovered a brand new species. And I told him, I said, look, why don't you just name it friggin' life?
Yeah, there you go.
Yep.
I'm not a deep anaerobe guy. Like, I have not gone down that rabbit hole very much. I've played in the facultative and the aerobic biology, but I've not gone down deep down the anaerobic. And that's something that I'll have Leaf on the show sometime in the future when he's further along in his PhD.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. So Indigo wants to ask, are you aware of a way to naturally chelate or chelate hard water to make the calcium carbonate plant available and softer water?
I don't know of a natural way. I know they're doing a lot of reverse osmosis along with the ionized water. I don't know if we talked much about ionized water, but the H plus and the OH minus. What's nice about ionized or energized water that's in living organisms is it's like the fourth stage of water, but it doesn't have any surface tension. So it's really beneficial to drink that. It tastes really good. It's kind of almost slippery. It's almost feels like a soap, but it's got a nice taste to it. People seem to like it. Just probably instinctively know that it's good for you. Crops grow better. It has more oxygen. Fish grow better. Plants grow better. Greenhouses are using it. But it has less surface tension. If you're going to use it with herbicides, you got to be real careful because like on Roundup, you can only use like 1/10 as much. Even on Roundup Ready corn, it'll overdo the system and kill your Roundup Ready corn. And on some chemicals, you got to go 1/20th. So it's a way to lower your cost, but there's no label for it. That's the problem. So I think ionized, energized water, whatever you want to call, I think we've got a lot to learn about that. I think that's going to be a whole new wave. I know where they're feeding it to hogs and cattle, they're getting hogs to market a whole month earlier, and on cattle, maybe 1 to 2 months earlier. And we all should be drinking ionized water. It's just so much healthier for you. And there are systems out there that you can buy that you can have that done. So I'm going to tell you a little secret. Manganese is used to split the water molecule. Well, when they do these pipes, they got little balls in there. The big secret is what's in those balls. Now, I don't know this for sure, but I'd be willing to lay money on it that it's made out of manganese, and that's what they're using to split that. Because as the water flows through this pipe, it swirls, comes in contact with the manganese. The water molecule gets split up into H plus and OH minus, the hydrogen ion and the hydroxyl, and that's what you're looking for. And that can last about 6 months, maybe up to a year in a tank, but very good for human health, animal health, plants. Probably the microbes like it too, because you got to be able to split that hydrogen off to make proteins and enzymes and all that good stuff. So it's really good. That's something I think we're going to be learning a lot more about here in the future. Sorry, got a little off topic, but
no, that was good. And I think Harvest Harmonics is the company that we had on this podcast.
Yeah. Okay.
About that.
Yeah. Okay. What's next?
How often do you test soil, plants, etc.?
Usually on soil tests, a minimum of once every 3 years. It depends a little bit on whether you're grid soil sampling. The closer you do those samples, where it gets pretty expensive. So at least once every 3 years. And then we like to, on tissue test, if you're having a problem, I like to see the tissue test. SAP test, it's not going to be too long. They're doing research on it where we may be able to put sensors in maybe 10 to 15, 20 plants in a field, and we'll be able to get readings continuously around the clock. The problem with SAP analysis and bricks is that it varies so much. Time of day, the weather. Those plants can sense when a weather front is coming, and they'll take all their sugars and put it into the roots in case that something happens to them and that they've got sugars that they can regrow back out. So it varies a lot. But when we start getting 24-hour sensors that will give us data, of course, it's going to be a lot of data, but we're going to be able to make a lot more sense of this because we can correlate it to what's going on with the weather and the temperature, soil temperature, and organic matter levels, all that in the soil to figure out what we can do to improve that crop. And those things are coming down the pike. It won't be too many years, and we'll be having automatic sensors. Those AI is going to be telling us how to farm here pretty darn quick. Hopefully it gets smart enough to tell us that we need to do no-till and cover crops, but that all depends on the programmer who puts it in there. So I'd really like to get that job, even if it was only for one day.
Yeah.
Love it, dude. Love it.
So mycorrhizal fungi can solubilize pee, right?
Absolutely.
Not them themselves, but they're more the transporters. It's the bacteria that they're feeding on the end of the hyphae, and those are your anaerobic bacteria that are doing your solubilizing bacteria. So all really the mycorrhizae are is freight trains. They're taking sugar from the plant, they're feeding the bacteria at the end. And so, yeah, in a way, you're partially right, but it's mainly those bacteria at the end. And then they're sucking back the solubilized phosphorus, and that's kind of like their money. As long as they keep bringing money back, they can get sugar in exchange. And they'll use some of that sugar, but they'll also pay off their workers. And mycorrhizae fungi are, they're very good at keeping certain microbes in balance in the soil. They're kind of almost like cops, policemen, regulators, whatever you want to call them. But they're really important for that. So yes and no. I'm not going to argue with you too much, but it's mainly the bacteria at the end that are solubilizing the bacteria. They're more like freight trains, I like to say, bringing stuff back and forth. That makes sense?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, and Case got another one. What is your number one indicator of soil plant health when evaluating a new field?
Probably the big thing is calcium is, if you're looking just at soil test, okay, say I just have soil test, I'm going to look at the calcium and the boron levels first. That's and the organic matter. So organic matter, boron, calcium, those would be my top three to look at first. Because usually nitrogen can be messed up by a lot of things. So you can have really high organic matter, but if you're putting on a lot of nitrogen, these other NP and K things, that can get messed up. So those are the three I look for in a soil test. When I go out to scout, I want to see how dark green that plant is. And the darker green it is, almost a blue color, the healthier that plant is, I can almost guarantee you. And then if you want to look at sap analysis or the bricks, the higher the bricks, the less insect disease you're going to have. Those insects can fly over and they can sense the frequency. And when they see a field that's really dark green, the frequency is different, and they'll fly right over it because they know they can't break down the proteins that are being there. So you want to have complete photosynthesis and complete protein formation to have healthy plants. And that usually is an indication of robust, very thick, big stems and leaves. And I mean, it just looks like the best corn. You know what the best corn, soybeans, whatever the plant is, whatever the best one is, kind of use that as your indicator. And how close are you to the best that you've ever seen? And that will give you an indication. You can kind of start to judge it a little bit. So color, just looking at the color and how those plants look will tell you a lot. I've been out to fields where guys had just tremendously good. They were spoon feeding micronutrients, foliar feeding them, doing no-till and cover crops. And I would look at their corn plants and I'd see just a tinge of zinc deficiency and just one tar spot, okay? just at the very bottom. Okay. Went to the next plant in another field right next door, different variety, probably different planting date. Guy farmed it completely different. Found 6 nutrient deficiencies and found 6 more diseases. And the plants, this guy over here is getting 275 bushel corn. This guy over here is getting 130 to 150 bushel corn. And the difference is in the nutrition. And you can just see it in the color and the health and how thick the stalks are and how healthy those plants are. When you have healthy plants, they grow like crazy. And you can tell a healthy plant. I mean, it doesn't take too much. Once you get that seared into your brain, you're going to remember that. So, yeah. And I'm a picture guy. I see everything, my data and everything, I see it in pictures. So for me, that's how I can put all these complex ideas sometimes together and remember stuff, is I visualize what's going on with the plant. That's how I do things. And that makes me maybe a little bit different. But it's beneficial when you're looking at biology, understanding how everything fits together as much as possible.
Leighton, you got anything to add to that? Because I think he pretty much covered it.
Damn, he did. Damn.
I told you it was going to be like a fire hose.
And we love it. Believe me, we love it.
Yeah.
So are boron and calcium
antagonistic? They sure are. Even though they depend, they're like a brother and sister. Okay, they're related. They need each other. But you get too much boron and that'll tie up calcium. You get too much calcium, that'll tie up boron. So you got to have that you got to have mom in the middle, the soil organic matter, to keep the kids from fighting too much. Okay, does that make sense?
Yep, store it on the CEC sites. Don't let them come in contact.
Yes, because they're like kids. They like to fight with each other, but they need each other. They depend. You got to have boron in order to get calcium into the plant. So I don't know exactly all the chemical reactions that go on there, but I just know one of the biggest things that I look at, and there is somebody that says when he looks at the nutrient pyramid, he starts with boron because calcium is so important. Number 2 for him is calcium, because calcium controls well over 130, maybe as much as 146 different enzymes and key enzymes that we got to have. So you really got to have enough calcium out there. Matter of fact, if you got good calcium, you're going to have a lot less weeds. Almost all of our weeds come from when we have a lack of calcium. When you have really good weeds or really good calcium levels out there, you'll see that you have a lot less weeds. And I have a really good book that says When Weeds Talk. Okay.
Oh, I love that. Yes.
Yeah. I do have all my other books. Do we have a minute or two? I'll just hold these up. I don't know if we can. Can you see that?
Is that Jeff Lowenfeld? Yeah.
Lowenfels, that's a good one. Here's another one. Whoop. Teaming with
fungi.
Teaming with fungi by Jeff again. Teaming with microbes. This one I kind of nice. Sorry. This one is teaming with nutrients. I don't have the jacket on there, but maybe I can do it this way.
That's Jeff Lowenfels again.
Yeah. Yep. Teaming with nutrients. Here's one that I kind of like. This is a heavy read, but Soil Ecology by Patrick Lavelle and
Lavelle,
Spain. Oh, this has got a lot of good information.
Lavelle co-authored the Cartufa paper.
Yeah, building soils for better crops. This is just a nice introduction. They don't get too deep, but that's not a bad one. Here's one of my favorites. Boy, this is an expensive book. You guys seen this one?
Yep.
Humic soil, organic soil conditioning, and see if I can get it over here so you can see the author. William R. Jackson, PhD. He just died here a couple years ago. And here's another one. Now, this is another deep read. Boy, this is a tough one to read. I've read this book 3 times, and I only know about maybe 1 or 2, 3% of it. Let me see if I can get it over here so you can see it. Mineral Nutrition of Higher Plants. Expensive book, Boy, it's a tough read. You're going to get the dictionary out, use a lot of big words, but I do get some good stuff out of this. I go back to it. I got a lot of underlined sections on there, but I got to simplify it. I'm not that smart, guys. If I can't simplify it, I don't understand it. So that's kind of where we're at. Just a couple good books that if you want to get into it from beginner all the way up. So
nice. So we got a couple more questions, and then we got to
let us go.
Is
ionized? Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
Is ionized water similar to fourth phase easy water?
Yes, it's exact same thing. I've heard 3 or 4 presentations, and I'm like, man, that sure sounds familiar. And there's different terms: ionized water, energized water, easy water. I think they're all pretty much the same. As far as I can tell, it's all they're all the same. Yep.
I tend to differ with that, but again, water, like if you go down the ball paper, you'd understand that water comes in so many different forms.
Okay.
We don't know enough to really comment.
Oh, well, that could be. You're going to correct me on that, and that's fine.
No, hey, it's all about trying to keep up with the information coming out.
Yeah.
I had a conversation today where someone quoted me on saying that what we know today may change tomorrow. So
absolutely. I'm always updating. And you know what? I think a big difference is when it's in the body, water acts a lot differently than when it's not associated with biology. Okay. So there's going to be subtle, maybe it's subtle, but there's subtle differences on how it's going to react and what form it's in. So yeah, I wouldn't argue with you on that. So thanks for making that clear.
Yeah. Just trying to keep the shape, right? There's more to this than we understand.
Yeah.
Oh, so much more. Yeah. What is your method for pre-treatment for seeding before planting?
So what are you referring to on pre-treatment?
So a lot of guys will coat their seeds.
Okay.
Some guys suck on their seeds. I mean, you're obviously big farming. You can't suck on every corn seed, but do you have something you recommend for the people to treat their seeds before they actually plant them?
There's a lot. It'd be hard for me to just say one thing because it kind of depends on each field. Some guys are using different programs, and a lot of guys are putting zinc and sulfur in. We know that, but now we're starting to get into some of the biology, some of the biologicals. I really do like the compost tea idea, especially where you have the red wigglers. And I know Johnson Sioux, they talk about their whole process. I've had a hard time making that work on my farm. I don't know, just didn't do something right on it, but I do it on a much larger basis. And I didn't take me long to figure out it's the worms that make that thing work. That's where the biology's coming from. So I'm trying to get all the red wigglers I can. They're about $25 to $30 a pound, and I could use probably 1,000 pounds. So think about how much money that would be just for my 100-foot long compost pile that I'm doing. But I got some worms that I've scattered out there, and they'll reproduce themselves 30 times. But putting something with the compost and the biology in there, boy, we're seeing some results here in Ohio where they're doing that. And guys it's a very easy minimum 10 bushel, sometimes up to 30, 40, 50 bushel yield increases just by straightening out your biology. A lot of it, you just got to get them back into the soil. We've killed them off, and we just got to get them reintroduced. So. Yep.
Biology is what builds every cell in the plant. So the more biology, the more workers.
It's all about biology. I heard that somewhere today. I don't know.
Yeah, a couple of times here and there anyway.
Yep.
So we've got one quick question left here. Does limestone substrate provide enough calcium?
Well, I forget the percentage, and don't quote me on this, but calcium carbonate, it's a pretty high percent calcium. Gypsum, we're using a lot more gypsum, but if you're going to use gypsum, you got to use the lily white gypsum, the what you got on your wallboard. you don't want too dark a colored gypsum. The gray and the blacks have a lot of heavy metals in them, and that's going to tie up a lot of things in your soil. So either get the white or get as close to white. Pink isn't too bad. That's water treatment gypsum. Those are your best sources. And most of them are going to have a pretty high percentage gypsum. If you don't have too high a pH, if your pH is already good and you don't want to change it, lime if you need to change your pH. And then it just depends on whether you want how much magnesium you need. So that there's always that. It's not an easy thing. You got to kind of look at all those things when you do that. So it looks like we're right at that 2 hour.
Yep. Yeah. And also just take into consideration slow release or quick release.
Yes.
So that's another piece of the puzzle.
Yes. And I didn't talk about that, but the quick release is fine, but it's not going to last very long. That's your problem. And it's usually
good if you already have a high pH and you don't want to go too high. Right. The quick release is going to solve that problem.
Right.
But listen, Jim, you have got to come back. We scratched the surface on so many topics that I'd really like to suss out. And so I really appreciate your time and the fact you gave us the whole 2 hours and came out and had a great conversation with us. Ken, as always, thank you so much for all the hard work and behind the scenes work that you do for this podcast. And audience, thanks for listening and coming on board.
All right. Thanks a lot. We'll see you.
Okay, guys. Jim, stick around. I'm just going to end the broadcast and we'll talk after. So take care, guys. We'll see you on Wednesday with Andy Lopez and myself.